All right, good afternoon, everybody. Today is April 19th, 2018, and this is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee. I am joined by council members Andrea Jenkins, Steve Fletcher, Philippe Cunningham, and Lene Palmisano. My name is Alondra Cano, and I'm the chair of the committee. Today on our agenda, we have a public hearing, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 14 items for consent and 3 items for discussion. So before we get into our public hearing, I would like to see if there's any questions on the agenda and on the consent items specifically. And please note, I'm not using speaker management, so I'll be looking for your little red tags for any questions or issues. Councilmember Palmisano. Oh, okay. All right. So with no questions on the consent items, I will go ahead and approve those items. Oh, okay. A brief comment from Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to leave this on consent, but I just want to note that item number 8, related to buyback in the Downtown Improvement District, I think is sort of points to something that I hope that this committee will take up as we move forward to think about sort of aligning our staffing levels with the places that we see a need for safety work to happen without private organizations or neighborhood organizations needing to step in and provide additional dollars and do this through an overtime system. I think it's important for us as a policymaking body to move away from relying on buyback for critical public safety work and also to centralize control and democratic decision-making bodies of where our police are deployed. So I think that's going to be a longer-term project, so we'll leave this on consent for today to keep things moving, but I just wanted to comment that I think this is an item that we're going to see coming through, and until we do something to sort of refocus the way we're thinking about buyback, it's going to continue to be, I think, attention in this committee and how we use resources.
Thank you for that comment. So without further questions then on this agenda, we will go ahead and approve the consent items and move those forward. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And now we will move to the public hearing for the reappointment of our fire chief. And before we get started, we have our mayor joining us today. So Mayor, if you would like to share some words.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak prior to the public hearing as I have another engagement, but this one was absolutely critical for me to be able to speak on behalf of our extraordinary Chief Friedel. The fire department as a whole and the employees within the fire department, both rank and file as well as administration, are probably the most loved entity, I think, in our entire city right now, and it is due to the work of individuals sitting in this row right here. It is due to our chief. It is due to the rank and file, the community work and the work that you've done to save people's lives, quite literally, has benefited our city in a really extraordinary way. From the 35W bridge collapse and to the 2011 North Side tornado to the explosion of the Minnehaha Academy, Chief Friedel has been there for Minneapolis. His commitment to public safety and a strong history of supporting our firefighters and their health are beyond reproach. And as deep as his history with the department runs, he's been a very forward-thinking chief. He's recognized that for the department to be more effective, its composition should reflect the community that they're serving, so he did something about it. Under the chief's leadership, the fire department launched the Emergency Medical Services EMS Pathways program to help reach more young people, including students of color. Every cadet class now includes 30% from the EMS Pathways Academy, where graduates receive emergency medical technician certification as part of a paid program. He launched that program back in 2014, and it's even stronger today. The current cadet class is 52% people of color and 15.8% female. Another 50% are veterans. He's also helped make sure Minneapolis is at the forefront of the fight to protect our firefighters' health, which is extremely important. The department was early to recognize that the carcinogens clinging to a firefighter's gear is a risk, so we made investments in new technology and training techniques to keep their gear clean. Seems like a little thing, but when we're talking about cancer, it's not. The chief has been with the department since 1979. He's done it all over the last 40 years, literally all of it. He's been a firefighter, fire captain, battalion chief, duty deputy chief, and deputy chief of training to assistant chief of operations. That's a mouthful, but He's been worth it. And when you hear the way he talks about Minneapolis, about his job, it's clear he loves his work in the city. And well, Chief, the city loves you back. There's nobody I'd rather have in my corner than Chief Friedel. I'm proud to appoint him, and I would ask for your support. Thank you so much for having me, council members.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Okay, so we will go ahead and move forward with the public hearing. I will open this public hearing for the reappointment of our fire chief. If there's anybody here to speak on this issue, please feel forward to come up and take the microphone. Questions? If you would like to speak, please come on up. Go ahead and take your place by the microphone. State your name and your address and your speech.
My name is Joe Madison, 3243 23rd Avenue South, Ward 9, Precinct 6. On behalf of myself and I'm also Secretary of Minneapolis Firefighters Local 82. We support the reappointment of John Friedel as Chief of the Department. We look at his accomplishments, and we also look at what some of the things he's looking at as far as moving forward. And we also support that one of our own, Brian Tyner, Assistant Chief of Administration, also has a leg up in the future as consideration of Chief of the Department. We have gone through a lot, and John came in here and cleaned up a lot of stuff, and we're very appreciative of that. And I would also, for the record, like everybody to know that the Pathways program was also contract language with Minneapolis Firefighters Local 82, and we also invested a lot of effort into that. And we just would like to have acknowledgement on that. Also, with John and his reappointment, we continue to provide a great service in Minneapolis, and we will continue to do so across the board. And I also acknowledge Andrea Jenkins. Years ago, and you guys don't know this, she participated in our first Fire 101 Ops. And I remember that day when you were there, and so does JR. So thank you for being there. And we've been approached to do that again with the new council members. And hopefully we can work something out in the fall of this year. But thank you.
Thank you for that testimony. Do we have any other folks that would like to come up and be a part of this public hearing? Without any more folks here to speak on this item, I will go ahead and move this reappointment forward. Thank you. It's hard to kind of catch the little tablet. So Councilmember Philippe Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair Cano. I just wanted to take a quick moment before we move forward to speak in favor of the reappointment of Fire Chief John Friedel. When I was working in the mayor's office, I discovered that Chief Friedel was doing big things and successfully creating pathway programs for young people, and that his work had helped to produce one of the most diverse firefighting forces in the country. I feel that he gets it in a very rare way, it being understanding how racial equity fits into all of what the city enterprise does, fiscal responsibility, innovative, creative, forward-thinking, and addressing the silver tsunami by bringing in a diverse workforce all combined. I support Chief Friedel's vision of revolutionizing the field of firefighting by taking the reality that firefighters aren't just fighting fires anymore, but instead are largely responding to 911 health calls and providing emergency medical care. Chief has created multiple entry points for young folks from low-income backgrounds, in particular to join his workforce through the EMS Pathways programs for 18 to 24-year-olds and the high school Fire Explorers and EMS programs. So we have a great leader in Chief Friedel, and I look forward to supporting him with all of his efforts in creating an ecosystem in Minneapolis that provides top quality care during emergencies, while also bringing in marginalized folks from our community to be able to serve our community. So although Mayor Fry is not here, I just want to say thank you to Mayor Fry for putting this reappointment forward. And thanks to all who have supported in making this work possible.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Fletcher, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also want to speak in favor. I've appreciated Chief Friedel's work, particularly on thinking about how do we respond with the right workforce and with the right equipment to the right calls. And I think that kind of thinking about how do we not send a huge truck to every 911 distress call that's a health emergency, how do we start to think about how to be smarter with our resources and really think about what the future of this department should look like, I think is really solid forward thinking. I'll just say on the campaign trail, I got a chance to talk to thousands of people about what they were concerned about the city, and nobody ever brought up the fire department. And that's actually a testament to the very, very good work that this fire department does, and the fact that we all assume and have been given no reason not to assume that when we call 911 and we have an emergency, on those rare occasions that we do, that we're going to get a great response. And so I appreciate that leadership. I appreciate the work that all of you do in this fire department, and we'll be happy to vote yes today.
Wonderful. Any more comments from council members? It sounds like Councilmember Andrea Jenkins. Go ahead.
I guess I would just comment that to you, my colleagues, to please go on the fire training course. It is extremely fun, and it gives you a sense of the dedication and the hard work that our firefighters put in every day. And I support the department wholly and Chief Friedel as its leader, and will be voting in favor of his reappointment.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councilmember. All right. So I will also just share some words. I had the opportunity to meet with our chief earlier today, and was just remembering how when I was in college, I read an article about the fire department under not such positive light, and really happy to know that over the last 4 years, my interaction with the fire department has been around diversifying the workforce, ensuring that we're addressing the opioid crisis, making sure that young people have opportunities for training within the department, ensuring that our employees and our fire department throughout the city feels like we have the right equipment, that we have the right approach. And so I've been really thankful to be a part of that with the chief now, and of course we'll be voting in favor. So thank you so much for your work on that front. So before we accept this, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing and then move it forward for approval to be sent to our city council. So all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And now I will invite the fire chief to please share a couple of words with us.
Madam Chair, committee members, thank you very much for the opportunity. I certainly want to start by thanking Mayor Fry for bringing my name forward for reappointment as a fire chief. It's something that I take a lot of pride in. Excuse me, all the success that we've had over the last few years, quite frankly, couldn't have happened without the support of my staff and certainly the support of Local 82 that are here today, and also Charles Rucker from the African American Firefighters Association. We have all worked very hard to try to move that rock forward. And sometimes that rock gets stuck in wet sand and it's very difficult to push. And so you can't push it alone, but together we can. It's amazing what we can all do. And, we look forward to the next term. If I have that, I'm so privileged to be reappointed that we continue the fine work that we've done and maybe complete some of those tasks. I know going forward, it's going to be my focus over my next period. In my short term, I've even talked about with Mayor Fry about really developing the next leader for this department. That is going to be my goal. So when we have a list of names that are going to be so qualified to step up, maybe Chief Heiner or others who may be interested in this position, that they're prepared to step up. So we can continue the fine tradition that this department has had over the years and provide the same quality of service that I think this city deserves. So again, I thank you for that. I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I thank you for this opportunity. I'm proud to say that I may be reappointed as the chief of the Minneapolis Fire Department. I know that. Thank you.
Chief, before you sit down, we have one question from Councilmember Philippe Cunningham.
I've got a hard-hitting question here, Chief. What's your favorite part about the job?
I mean, the obvious answer probably is years ago was getting on the big red truck and turning on the sirens and making all kinds of noise and squirting water and putting wet stuff in the red stuff. But as you age and you promote, things change. Your priorities change a little bit. And probably now over the last few years, it's really trying to make a difference in creating opportunity for the inner city youth to maybe have a chance to think about being a firefighter, the same dreams that I had when I was a young kid. And so that, and working with, with my staff and the union folks, being able to be able to nurture that dream and get them involved in pushing that down the road, I think it's something I really, really like today. When I I know I'm going to be graduating a cadet class here in June, and there are members from the EMS Academy in that group, and it just makes me very proud to see what those young men and women have achieved. And I think they've probably achieved something and they never thought they could. And so it's really nice to be able to create that opportunity for them.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Wonderful. All righty, so then we have approved this item, and we are now down to our three discussion items. The first item is the 2018 first quarter Minneapolis Police Department body-worn camera metrics report. So whoever's here to do that, please come on up. Thank you.
Someone's going to have to sign on. It's logged off. The world's most complicated password. Let's hope we get it on one try. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay, Madam Chair, committee members, Commander Chris Granger from the MPD today, presenting 2018 quarter one body-worn camera metrics. Today, I'd like to touch on the policy revision and the training plan that we're going to roll out here. Give you a little update on our two body-worn camera auditors. Talk a little bit about the supervisor auditing program we're going to be rolling out, and then touch on 2018 quarter one body-worn camera metrics, department-wide metrics, and then also the results from our random sample qualitative review we did. And then I'd like to give you a preview of a public dashboard we're working on, and then lastly, finish with next steps. The revised policy is complete and was effective on 4/4/18. I was emailed to every MPD employee, and then also the discipline matrix was revised, and that was also implemented. Roll call training is in process. There's a training document being created with talking points to aid supervisors in conducting the training. Each employee who receives the training will be documented on a training log, and we're expecting to roll this out by the end of the month. Our second body-worn camera auditor began work on April 9th, and both auditors are continuing with their training on our various databases, policies and procedure, and also procedures for conducting body-worn camera audits. Supervisor auditing. This is a program that we've provided training to patrol supervisors at the rank of sergeant to conduct reviews using manual techniques in the body-worn camera database. At this time, dashboards will be developed, but not at this moment. Supervisors will be reviewing body-worn camera videos and usage data for their assigned personnel monthly for policy compliant, whether that's the body-worn camera policy or other MPD policies, or for performance issues related to the level of professionalism, carrying out their duties consistent with current law, and looking also for training issues as well. These reviews are going to provide supervisors with an opportunity to be proactive in addressing issues with their staffs. Audit criteria will be determined by the Quality Assurance Unit and tracked to ensure compliance. The program is in its final stage of development with anticipated rollout in Q2. Q1 body-worn camera metrics, department-wide. January, we recorded 42,000 videos with an average of 1,355 per day. February, we recorded 39,749 body-worn camera videos with an average of 1,420 per day. And in March, 51,968 body-worn camera videos were recorded with an average of 1,676 videos per day.
The percentage of body-worn camera videos without correctly formatted case numbers was at 27.6% for Q1. At my last presentation last month, that number was right around 30. But the percentage of body-worn camera videos without correctly formatted case numbers was at 5.9% for the week of April 4th through April 11th, following the recent policy revisions. So we saw a considerable or significant improvement there. The next slides represent a comparison by percentage of the overall or specific CAD events that required activation of a body-worn camera and the individual officers who were equipped with a body-worn camera who responded to the call. This percentage does not include events where the officer canceled off the event before arriving, and the percentages are by month. So overall CAD events that required activation where officers responded who were equipped with body-worn cameras, as from April 1st to April 15th, that percentage was 81%. Significant improvement from March, which was at 60, and February, which was at 55. And this is for overall CAD events. When looking at traffic law enforcement and officers equipped with body-worn cameras who conducted these traffic stops, April 1st to the 15th, the percentage was at 90%, and in March, 72%, and February, 70%. Another improvement. Suspicious person calls and officers equipped with body-worn cameras, percentage April 1st to the 15th was 82%. In March, it was 62%, and February was 57%, another improvement. And lastly, unknown trouble calls and officers equipped with body-worn cameras, April 1st to the 15th, 79%, March of this year, 58%, and February, 49%. As also part of the audit, we also conducted a random sample of 25 officers from Q1 of this year. The random sample from all the precincts included a total of 25 officers equipped with body-worn cameras who were primarily 911 responders from January 1st to March 31st. A random sample of 10 body-worn camera videos were selected per officer for qualitative review. The metrics used was there a full 30-second pre-event recording? Did activation at the conclusion of the call appear to be appropriate? Was there a proper case number entered, and was there a category entered? And here are the results. We're still learning in our auditing efforts. In our data pool, there were 36 videos that were actually startups that were included in their random videos. But we did review 214 videos, and basically the numbers from Q4 compared to Q1 basically remain the same. Okay. Patterns observed. We still continue to see a lack of case numbers for body-worn camera videos. Late activations were observed where officers activated their body-worn cameras upon arrival or after arriving on a call. Some officers were improperly turning off their body-worn cameras when the scene was code 4, but before the conclusion of the call, and a lack of narration on body-worn cameras for deactivation reason was observed. And most of these instances are covered by the policy revision. Either it was clarified or added, except the narration piece was already in policy. We're in the final stages of developing a dashboard that will be accessible to the public on the Inside MPD website. The site will be accessible by tablet and cell phone. A list of frequently asked questions is being developed to add to the site. The dashboard will be interactive, given the period of time selected for view. It will feature a link to the body-worn camera policy and to the body-worn camera state statute. The metrics on the dashboard will include the body-worn camera count, which is the number of body-worn cameras assigned to the MPD or assigned to MPD personnel. Total video recorded since January 1, 2017. There'll be a metric for active evidence, which is video currently stored according to retention schedules. An average number of videos generated per day, a monthly count of body-worn cameras deployed and used, a graph that shows the percentage of CAD incidents requiring activation, where at least one video was recorded from each officer equipped with a body-worn camera who arrived at the incident. And then also plotted on this graph are the first policy revision from July of 2017, and also the issuance of an administrative announcement requiring case numbers for body-worn camera videos from March of this year. And lastly, the body-worn camera policy revision from April of this year.
And one of the things that we've noted, each time a policy change was made, there was an improvement in compliance. Here's a screenshot of what the dashboard could look like. And again, the graph here is where the policy revisions and the administrative announcements are plotted. And then lastly, the findings of this audit will be provided to precinct commanders as soon as possible so they can take action to improve compliance. We're going to continue developing our dashboards for supervisory and audit staff with additional metrics. Our plan is to implement the supervisor auditing program in Q2, and roll call training will be conducted on the revised policy.
Thank you for that presentation. So if folks have questions, I'm happy to give you the floor. So we have a Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I know we're here to talk about the metrics report, and I really appreciate this update. Can I ask you a policy question about it? Okay. I was just curious as to whether or not there has been any conversation around domestic violence calls and whether or not the body-worn cameras are activated or not during those calls. Has there been any specific conversations around that?
Well, I didn't look at domestic violence metrics for today. It does say in the policy, though, that there's a provision in there where if so a victim or a witness or somebody that's feeling inhibited about giving a statement can make a request to turn the cameras off, and we can consider the situation and honor that request if needed. Beyond that, I guess I'm not familiar with more conversation as far as that's concerned. The expectation, what we would like to see, I think, is people documenting all calls for service whenever possible, unless, of course, there's an exception there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you for these updated metrics.
Thank you.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm obviously quite pleased with this report today. The April 4th policy rollout, which has taken place since we last met as a committee, seemed to have gone well. And we said last time at committee, when you presented the fourth quarter metrics, that it seemed that policy changes seemed to also increase the compliance in the program. And we can talk about whether that's because of the increased priority placed on it or some other reason. But we are seeing increased use and tracking appropriately of body cameras being worn when there are policy changes. So that's great. It was important and valuable to show that you have a training and implementation plan that's already in progress. We see the supervisory role that we suggested here. While I wish that some of that were more automated for those supervisors, I know that that's something that's manual right now, but we'll look at getting there. The analysts and infrastructure to assist with this labor-intensive program are in place. You showed that. The transparency or the public dashboard that's being prepared per your plans outlined here look good. I will always tend to argue that the number of videos and the number of hours captured are less valuable to know than some more meaningful metrics, and I'll think about what those might be, and I think we should welcome those ideas from the public, but this is a good start. I want to point out that this is exactly the kind of report we asked for as a result of the audit last fall, so thank you for all of your work.
Thank you.
Do we have a question? Okay, Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this report. I was certainly vocal about not feeling like what we were getting a couple of months ago, so I wanted to also be vocal about thanking you for something that feels very responsive to the feedback you got from this committee. I think this is a marked improvement, and I think we can move from talking about are we getting the information that we need to make an assessment of this program to actually talking about the program, which is a significant step forward. So I think that's great. And I'm encouraged by the improved results that we saw since the policy rollout. I hope that that's not a short-term bump while everybody's talking about it. I hope we can sustain that. and see continued improved compliance. And I'm looking forward to continuing to see these metrics. I appreciate you making it a dashboard so that it's consistently available to us. I think this is a good step forward. So thanks for your work on this.
Thank you.
I do have one question. If you could please explain a little bit more about the lack of narration piece that I noticed in one of the slides. I'd like to better understand what are we asking officers to do through the narration? What kinds of information are we hoping to capture? When in the process does that happen? And then why do you think it's not happening? And kind of what are we doing to correct that part of it?
Well, to start with, what we require is if you're going to deactivate your body-worn camera video prematurely, we expect people to narrate the reason why. And then that narration or that reason why must also be documented in either the CAD, computer-aided dispatch, added remarks, or a police report. And we really want to know why the cameras are being turned off early, and to be able to evaluate that. We did see that in the random sample of officers that was conducted. And I can't really speculate as to why that's occurring. What I can tell you is it's something that we're going to be auditing going forward. We're going to be specifically looking for that both in the video and in the police reports or the added remarks to make sure that that is occurring. The only thing I would add to that is that requires more of a qualitative review, which is more labor intensive, time intensive. We're going to do it. We just can't reach as many videos at this time as much as we can do with quantitative, but it's something we're going to address. We know that it's occurring to a certain extent and it's required by policy, so we'll address it. So when we conduct future audits, that's something we'll continue looking for. And again, the results of this audit will be shared with the inspectors or the precinct commanders so that they can address the issue.
So you're saying that currently we know that some of that video deactivation is happening early, but we haven't been able to find out kind of why. We haven't been able to ask those officers like why that's happening.
No, not at this point. No, I mean,
Okay.
essentially what this random sample study did was I asked the auditors to review the videos to determine if the deactivation seemed appropriate. And one of the things that they noted was that there was a lack of narration, which is required by the policy.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll forward this information to the precinct commanders to follow up and, find out what's going on, and to also, I'll provide them with prepackaged training materials, a copy of the policy, whatever it takes to make sure that they understand that narration is required and that has to be done.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you for your report. I concur with the comments that have been shared up here by our council colleagues, and we're looking forward to have your continued support to strengthen and deepen the standing of this program within MPD and hopefully help other peer cities use body-worn cameras as well to ensure that we're having the intended outcome in our neighborhoods and with our residents. So I appreciate your presentation today and hope you have a good day.
Thank you.
All righty. We have wrapped up this first item for discussion, so we will go ahead and receive and file this report. All those in approval, please say aye. Aye. And we will move forward to our second item, which is the City Attorney's Office Criminal Justice Reform Initiatives presentation. And we have our City Attorney here, Susan Siegel, to walk us through this. So take it away.
I was very proud of myself to be able to open this all by myself. That's kind of embarrassing, but at any rate, good afternoon and thank you for this opportunity to run through some of the criminal justice reform work that our office has been working on. And I've got with me Mary Ellen Hang, who's my wonderful deputy and head of the criminal division, and then Jennifer Saunders, who was our third precinct community attorney, and in that capacity then started just this amazing work with Little Earth that has now resulted in an $850,000 federal grant for really community-led safety strategies at Little Earth. She's now our domestic violence team supervisor. So I'm delighted to have them both here. And then you're going to hear from some participants and Priscilla Brown from Urban Ventures about it's a different Pathways program, but no less important, I would say, than the fire department's Pathways program for individuals who have been charged with a gross misdemeanor weapons offense. So the focus of our recent initiatives has really been on 4 different things. One is eliminating criminal consequences for people because they just don't have the ability to pay. So things like bail reform fall into that bucket. Our work around reforming driving-related tickets and fines and fees falls into that bucket. Reducing the unnecessary use of jail. And Mary Ellen is a co-chair with a representative from the county on this joint city-county effort and has just been doing terrific work. Third is to reduce collateral consequences of the impact of the criminal justice system on people's futures so that they're not barred from obtaining housing or employment as a result. And then finally, and not least importantly, is to achieve reductions in recidivism and really by addressing underlying needs. This provides a long-term benefit both for our city, our communities, our neighborhoods, as well as for the individual. We want them to be successful in life. And one thing that I thought would be interesting to bring to your attention are just some of the changes in the culture of the work that we've been doing and the police department has been doing. Back from the broken windows theory days of 10 plus years ago, we're really operating in a different vein. And some of these numbers really show some of this work. Recent reductions in bookings in the jail, for example, 53% reduction. And I looked at our caseload numbers going back to 2008, about 10 years ago. And the number of livability offenses, these would be the broken windows theory types of offenses, have been reduced by 2/3. And it just shows our model now is really one of public health, using social services, using outreach workers in lieu of a heavy law enforcement approach. So on the topic of bail reform, one thing that we've worked on and Mary Ellen has really been a leader on is at the jail now, there's a risk assessment tool that is used. So it's validated and for both racial bias as well as effectiveness. It focuses on the risk for rebooking and or failing to appear in court, which are the 2 criteria for whether bail should be set. And it allows people who score on a lower level for nonviolent offenses to be released without any bail at all so that they're released quickly when they are booked into the jail. 131 individuals have been released since this tool was implemented in January 1 of this year. Another project, and it really is, again, Mary Ellen and her knowledge of the system and just common sense approach to criminal justice reform that's led to another innovation that the court is now rolling out countywide. And this is as they were analyzing data from the jail, they realized that a large number of the people arrested and booked into jail were there for bench warrants. And bench warrants are orders issued by the court because somebody did not appear for a required hearing. And so it's a court-initiated warrant for arrest. They found a few things which actually surprised me. A huge number, it's close to 70% of the letters sent out scheduling court hearings were returned to sender. So literally you had a whole lot of people who didn't even know that they were supposed to be present in the courthouse. And this one solution that Mary Ellen came up with was sign and release warrants, where the courts enter it in, and if you meet the criteria, it's your first time not appearing in that case. It gets entered into a database so that when the police see these people out in the community, instead of saying, aha, there's an active bench warrant and hauling them into jail, they're given a new court date by the officer right there out in the street, and with no jail, no bail, no arrest, no interference with people's lives. And from the pilot, a really high rate of compliance. 68% of people showed up for their hearings. And the court is also doing things like trying to do text reminders and email reminders and other just kind of simple, practical, common sense ways to reduce those, to improve appearances in court and reduce this whole cycle of bench warrant arrests. In the same bucket, we are actively lobbying for a change in state law so that driver's licenses are no longer suspended just for failure to pay fines and fees. It gets people into this vicious cycle of with thousands and thousands of dollars of debt. It has literally sailed through the House. It is on the House floor. It hasn't been brought up yet. We're stuck in the Senate, so we're hoping to get some progress there, because this would be a really great change statewide to stop keeping people who already are struggling and have lower incomes from just falling further into debt for no good reason. And it's not public safety related. This is about paying fines. So moving violations, that would, you still could lose your license if you had 4 in 5 years or something like that. 3 years? Yeah. What she said. We've also been working for the last couple of years on a bill that would give the courts the authority to waive criminal surcharges, which with lower level offenses, it's $75 and can often be more than the underlying fine is for, driving related offenses, for example. We're hoping that that passes. We'll see. We've been working on it for a couple of years. Another side project, but one I think that's been really, was really a positive, wonderful day, and I think improved court relations with the community, was a warrant forgiveness day that we worked on with the ACLU and the Minneapolis chapter of the NAACP, the courts, and the public defender's office. This one was held at Sabathani. We just had it was pouring rain, and we just still had an amazing turnout of people. Our prosecutors volunteered their time on a weekend, and we cleaned up a lot of old cases. Community service sites were set up right there in Sabathani. So we're hoping to entice the court into doing another one in North Minneapolis, but it's a work in progress. What are we doing around reducing collateral consequences? We're beefing up our diversion efforts. And as a number of you know, we were able to implement diversion on a pre-charge basis. So before anything gets filed with the court, it took a year-long IT project because of e-citations, and it automatically was getting filed with the court. Our IT department and the county's IT department, working with the courts, created a holding tank that our prosecutors now review charges. If they're bad charges, they get dismissed. For charges that citations that are court-required citations that is something, there's evidence supported by evidence, that we could prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and the people qualify for diversion, they're offered diversion. If they accept it, nothing will ever get, no charge will ever be filed with the court. We've also expanded the types of programs that we offer. We created the Interact program for misdemeanor level obstruction of justice charges, which, as I looked at those cases, as often as not, I feel like cool hand Luke here, that they're failure to communicate cases. And there's some event happening, people are excited, disturbed, concerned for whoever's involved in the incident, for example, if it's a medical emergency. While the law enforcement is there trying to control the scene and handle the emergency situation. So we worked with the police department, and in lieu of taking these through court, through a criminal prosecution process, individuals sit down with a representative of the police department, with a facilitator that we contract with Restorative Justice Community Action to talk. And so that the police can hear the individual's viewpoint, what they were trying to do and why, and the police can explain, why in certain scenes they need to keep people away or further away, and hopefully learn from each other, and on a one-to-one basis there, maybe improve police-community relations. You've heard the other, we've got a shoplifting driver diversion program, and with a more than a little push from our chair of the Public Safety Committee, we've got a PreCharge diversion program for prostituted persons that we've used along East Lake Street.
If I may, we have a question or a comment from the floor. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question specifically about shoplifting. What is the amount here that folks, what is the amount before it's considered a felony shoplifting charge?
I think it's $1,000. Above $1,000 is a felony.
And so up to $1,000 then would qualify for this?
That is correct. And I will point out, because I have reviewed it, people have talked about the Philadelphia District Attorney and the new policies that he has issued. For the cases within our jurisdiction, we actually are doing more than what he's implemented in Philadelphia. I love what he's doing. It's not to criticize him at all, but we're already, we're above average. Is what I would say in terms of our work, because we now offer for shoplifting, PreCharge diversion. Yeah.
This is just to share. This is a particular pain point a little bit for me because my mother struggled with addiction, and shoplifting is actually why she has 3 felonies on her record, because in Illinois it's $300 before it's considered a felony. And so when I saw this, it was just like, wow, that could have radically changed my life as the child of somebody who was incarcerated a few times. And so I'm really grateful for all the work that you're doing.
Well, good.
We have another question from Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Connell and Ms. Siegel. I'm curious, you talked about the Interact program, and I'm wondering how that relates to the proposal at the state legislature around strict, harsher penalties for protests, obstructing traffic, and obstructing justice, if you will, given your description.
Right. They're, and I'm not sure exactly where they are in the legislature now, but there have been bills, second session at least, introduced to increase the penalties to a gross misdemeanor, I think from a misdemeanor level offense on freeways and by the airport, maybe elsewhere.
Yeah.
It would still
malls, I think, was included in that conversation.
It would still leave discretion, I'm assuming, if it passed and if it was signed into law by the governor, for prosecutors to decide what the appropriate consequence was. So it's a little different than how we've approached it, although I will tell you it is not safe for people to go walking down on the freeway for anybody. So it's not something that I condone at all, but hopefully we would still retain the discretion. It wouldn't be a mandatory minimum kind of thing where we would have discretion to use our judgment in how we handle different incidents and protest activity.
So if that passed, it would not preempt this Interact program per se?
That's right. That's exactly right. Because this is a separate law, misdemeanor, obstruction of justice, which I suppose law enforcement, if you're ordering people to leave and they don't, they could include an obstruct charge in that. But yeah, it would not, and we would still maintain the discretion to use this diversion program.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so our numbers have gone up, and we're continuing to work on our diversion opportunities. And then the Downtown 100, it's not a new program. We've had it for, well, started it in 2010, but we continue to just get amazing results. And it's proof positive that by using social services, by addressing underlying needs, that we really do, because these are the most chronic offenders at a lower level. They're not violent felons, but we only have them on the list for a year, but we continue to see ongoing reductions in the number of offenses committed. So it's validation. It's something we can use with the county to affirm that it's a good use of probation resources for them. Community court. This is, we went out on a trip as part of the behavioral health initiative to look at how we can handle mental health issues better in the criminal justice system, and looked at a couple of different community court models that they have in the New York area, particularly this Red Hook Community Court. And the goal is a social service goal. It's to connect people with needed services. And so Mary Ellen, again, in partnership with Jeanette Warner at the Hennepin County Public Defender's Office, talked the Hennepin County Human Services into loaning a social worker who has been there in the arraignment calendar, and will go up and offer voluntary services to individuals. And it's just been a really positive change. And the court, I think, has recently agreed. We're in the process of implementing where we will get a dedicated calendar on Wednesday afternoons that will start to operate like a real community court with a dedicated social worker. So we're excited about that development. The burn grant I mentioned just briefly, but it's just been a terrific project. I'm really impressed with Jennifer Saunders, who just kind of took this on, largely wrote the grant herself, found great research partners, and it really is a community-led process. Little Earth owns all of the data that the researchers pulled together. It's not the researchers' property, it's not anybody else's property, and it really is just a community-led, community-engaged initiative. On the domestic violence front, we continue to innovate and try to move upstream there also. And so we've had this pilot going the last few years where we have a family therapist go out with a specially trained police officer to do follow-up calls, 911 calls in violent crime hotspots where a police report was not written, to just find out what's happening, how things are, do they need services. And with this kind of proactive approach, we have found that people are calling the family therapist. And so we're working with Hennepin County and North Point and other service providers on how to really roll this out in a proactive model instead of waiting for people to make the phone call and come themselves for services. Finally, pathways to new beginnings. So this started a few years back as we looked at our carrying a pistol without a permit cases. They were largely young adults, almost always a first offense at the adult level. And we wanted to know, is this a high-risk group? And maybe they just need some training on how to go about getting a permit to carry, because it is legal in the state of Minnesota. Or was this a group maybe with some higher needs? And our standard sentence, plea deal had been 30 days in the workhouse. Sometimes that was done on electric home monitoring. We got a conviction, and that's an enhanceable offense. So if you get charged again, they can enhance it to a felony. It's like, good for us. But what we found out was that there's a high rate of recidivism, and not just to carrying, but not an insignificant number of future violent felonies, which is not a good path either for the city or the individual. And so we figured somewhat, let's try something different because we can't be doing any worse than we are now. And so we put out a request for a proposal and got a really great response from Urban Ventures. And the program has been up and running now for a number of months. We've referred 24, maybe 25 or 26 people at last count. And it's just been really successful. And we're just really proud of this work because, again, it's looking at what do these individuals needs are, what will help them on a better path and a brighter future. Why are they feeling unsafe? Why do they feel like they need to carry a weapon? So with that, I am going to turn it over to Priscilla Brown, who is the program manager for us, and she's brought along some people who have been involved in the program.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. Again, I'm representing Urban Ventures, and we are just elated and excited that we were chosen to provide services to this initiative. And it's been just a wonderful working experience with Susan and her staff and team. We have, as Susan mentioned, we've actually been up and running nearly a year. Next month will be our year mark. And we have had, I think it's about 24 referrals, out of which 3 were terminated. So the remainder of those are actively in our program. The program consists of 2 phases. And first, we built the program to address and hoping to get to some deeper issues around those things that were impacting the individuals that are referred to us. So our training is built on a cognitive behavioral model, and the entire program is 108 hours, which is divided into 2 phases. Phase 1 is the most intensive. The individuals are there for 12 weeks, 1 time a week, all day on Thursday from 10 o'clock to 5 o'clock. And in that 5.5 hours, they're doing 4 different groups. And then there is a once a week for phase 1 check-in where they're working with a staff person to look at then to first building that relationship, giving additional support, and hopefully opening up that possibility of seeing other needs that we can help address for that individual. Once they have completed the first 12 weeks, phase 1, then they move into phase 2, which we've got out of 19, we've got 13 now that are in phase 2, a part of the program. And in the phase 2 part, they are actually coming 1 time a month for a group and once face-to-face check-in with the staff. We start in the orientation process by having them go through an actual diagnostic assessment, which we farm out to a mental health agency that provides that for us. And then under my administration, we do a risk assessment, giving us some information on their likelihood or risk to reoffend. And so we use those tools as we're working with the clients one-on-one to hopefully divert that and to, like I said, to get to the root issues and causes for the choices that they're making, because we are hoping that as they leave over the 15 months that they will be involved with us, that they will have gained skills and coping mechanisms that will help them to make better choices and obviously live healthier lives. With that said, unless there's other questions, I did and wanted to bring 3 of those that are involved in the program, because I think they would be the ones that would be able to speak best to what they have experienced, are experiencing, and what they are how they're benefiting from the services. So if there's questions for me, I can take those now, and then I would like to have the three that I've asked to come today to speak to you, have them speak on their own behalf. Okay. Why don't we start with you, Dominic?
Good afternoon. My name is Dominique Glasper. I'm in the Pathways program. One thing that I learned from them is keeping a positive mindset, associating yourself with people that's doing constructive things, thinking about how your actions and your decisions affect the people around you. They've been real resourceful. They assisted me in finding housing, furniture, all that good stuff. I quit drinking since I've been in the program, and slowly just been moving forward. You're welcome.
I'm not really a big speaker, but my name is Ilham. I'm the first member of the program. I was in the program for about almost close to the whole 12 weeks myself until others started joining. The biggest thing about the program was it gave me a second opportunity, like a second chance, that couldn't believe that I could get in a situation that I made a mistake about. And with Ms. Priscilla, and I was doing the one-on-one thing, so I got the whole anger management thing, the tips thing, one by one, and it helped me with a lot of stuff. And I'm thinking better now. I don't think too wild like I used to. I figured out that I did have a little anger issues, and they had to like bring it out of me. I didn't believe I was an angry person until I took the anger management class. And it's a wonderful opportunity, second chance that you can't take for granted. Thank you.
My name is Rick Schneider, and I want to start out by saying thanks for the opportunity to be in this program. You spoke earlier about what kind of impact it would have had on your life if your mother would have had an opportunity for a diversion program like this. I empathize. I'm employed in a position of trust, and this program has allowed me to keep my job and to continue to pay my bills, keep my house, and kind of keep life moving along. It's just been really big. It's had a huge impact on my life, and I think that the leadership that they have in this program is phenomenal. They really address a lot of important issues that I going into it I didn't understand. For example, one of the things that they do very well is they provide you with a scenario. They put you in a scenario. They say, this is happening. What do you do? And people give their answers. And they come back around and give you an alternative and help you kind of work through some of the emotions that you might have been feeling when you made that decision and help you make better decisions going forward. So I just want to say thank you, and thank you for the opportunity for being able to speak to the merit of the program.
So I do have a question, and I know I see there's at least one more person that would like to speak. Why don't we go ahead with
Is it questions for me or?
we will each explain who the question is for. Yes. So go ahead, Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Kano. I do have questions for our city attorney. So this is really exciting work, and I think it's very important that we continue to say out loud as often as we can that human beings in cages is a bug, not a feature of our legal system and our social system, and that is something that when we can avoid it, it is something that we want to avoid and that we want to think about how to divert and how to solve problems without getting there. And so I really appreciate this. I really appreciate this work. I'm wondering, knowing that 10 years ago we had a very different approach, and knowing that those approaches are still a part of our city's culture, are still a part of some of the work culture happening out in the precincts in neighborhoods. I'm wondering sort of how much you see held over, and I'll use an example. I know that there are still court watch programs where, with the help of the city attorney staff who are embedded in the precincts, citizens will get together to write impact statements encouraging harsher sentences for livability crimes, and that's something that's a meeting that still continues to happen, and so we're still putting some amount of city resources into what feels like a very opposite impulse, or what feels like a contradictory impulse to the sort of values stated in this program. And so I guess I'm wondering how aware you are of those contradictions, or if you see those as contradictions, and sort of what the trajectory is towards really making this stated set of values around diversion, around avoidance of incarceration, the values that are really embodied by our entire public safety program.
Chair Cano and Councilmember Fletcher, that's a really good question. And yes, I am aware of it. And generally, you know, there's one of our community attorneys is at a number of these court watch groups, but there is a distinction, and we use at times for people who are chronic. I'm just going to own it right here. We use the criminal justice system for leverage to get people the help that they need, whether they really want it or not. If they're offending in a neighborhood and making life miserable for the residents of that neighborhood, that's not good for them. It's not a safe lifestyle to be out on the streets constantly. And we've seen as many of our chronic offenders, you know, there aren't that many of them. It's small in number. You know, it's a city of 420,000, and it's, you know, a couple hundred maybe. But we then use within the system, often they go to Homes Court, which is designed for people experiencing homelessness. And again, we use a social service, public health type of model. So even if, you know, we are getting these, it isn't just to lock them up in the workhouse for longer periods of time. What we prefer is to have them assigned with active supervision by a probation officer, because that small segment is a group of people who actually have high needs. They are high need individuals, and they don't function very well left on their own, which is why they keep getting into trouble. And so we merge the philosophies, but we can, in some circumstances, kind of amp it up and then use the court system. But there are a lot of problem-solving courts that we then utilize when we're, you know, kind of in that little bit of a heavier enforcement mode between this Homes Court, mental health court, veterans court. So there are a lot of problem-solving courts where, again, it's a social work type of model, but it's within the court system instead of trying to keep them entirely out. So I'd say we use a uniform policy, and then it depends on the conduct. Like there was a problem was outside of Harbor Lights, the Salvation Army. And there was a drug dealer out there who was dealing drugs and beat up Dominic Boza, who was working then as a staff member at Harbor Lights. And you know what? That individual needed some consequences because he was preying on people. He was physically harming people. So occasionally, you know, the softest of touches doesn't work with everybody. But we do try to move forward with the same philosophy, although sometimes it's inside the Hennepin County Government Center instead of entirely outside. Does that help? Okay, good. Absolutely, it's an ongoing discussion. I would say our attitudes and our prosecutors' attitudes have changed, and the police department's attitudes have changed. I mean, the ones sitting there like, no, I think we should give this guy one more chance. before we, try to revoke his probation. I mean, it's a culture shift, but it is well in process.
Thank you for that. I do have a question for the program participants that came to be here today. Just curious if you have any ideas or thoughts, and actually the question could be for you as well, but it's not very often that we get to meet folks who are a part of all of the, reports and numbers that we see up here. And it's really special that you're both here today. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what ideas you might have for the future of the program in terms of what improvements could be made, what additions, what things we could add to the initiatives or the programs that you think would bring more success. We know that as a council, we struggle a lot with some of the issues around gun violence, and over the years we've had to witness and be a part of many conversations where folks are feeling really challenged, in our neighborhoods. And a lot of times we think, what else can we do besides put more police officers in the neighborhoods? What are some other ideas? What are some new strategies? What are some community-driven solutions? And I think some of this speaks to that. But if you have some things that you want to share now about what you think we could do to improve these type of programs so that we can be reaching more people or be reaching people in a better way, we as a council will eventually vote on the budget. And so those are resources that we can be thinking about for the future, about how we can deepen some of the impact, engage more young people, reach communities that sometimes our government gives up on or our own families give up on. And so we're just trying to really, listen to folks and really gather input. So if you've got suggestions or ideas, I hope it's not too early on. I lost track of how many months this program has been in operation. But if you're thinking about kind of the future, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts or ideas, or even just, some early thinking about it, some reflections.
The program was perfectly fine. The only problem was it was really every Thursday from 10 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So it was like it was just like going back to high school close to it. I took a nap there a couple of times during the classes and would wake up and go to the next class. But other than that, it's a great program. Maybe when we're almost done, we could probably just help the newer incoming people on continue with the classes. But I don't have no complaints with the classes. It's a great class.
So with the program on Thursday, you'd be there from 10 to 5?
Yeah.
So then you kind of have
That's only for the first phase. For the
the
second
first-
phase, you come once a month. You meet with she's my case manager. I meet with her and do the class with John Turnipseed once. So it'll be twice a month maybe, or I'll try to do it within one day.
Okay. And so then do people have to take off of work to go do that?
My job is perfectly fine with it. I mean, it's a better opportunity for myself. So they're perfectly fine with it. Work with my schedule around it. Get me every Thursday off. And now I get every first Thursday off to go to class.
Okay.
Can I just interject that is one of the things that we struggle with. I know that I've had.
Do you want to come to the microphone? Because this is televised at some point, so we want to be able to capture your voice.
You told me that. That's one of the struggles that we have. I know I've spoken to at least 3 referrals. In fact, one even this morning, as early as this morning, that it is sometimes a struggle because we've been blessed in that more than half of the referrals, they are working when they come to us. And so that becomes a huge negotiation factor with their employer to be able to take that whole day off. And so we do as much as we can to support, write letters, to the employers to help. In fact, Richard would be a great one to speak to that, because that kind of delayed his start like 2 or 3 weeks negotiating that piece with his employer. One of the things that as a program manager I would like to see is a second option that may look at having the program ran on a Saturday. Unfortunately, evenings won't work unless we put in a second evening because it's 5.5 hours, and you couldn't start realistically until about 6 o'clock. Who's going to be there till 11:30? No one. So and then taking having another evening drawn in. So as we designed that, we ended up with the one full day as kind of where do you go with it and what do you do, and so we're there with that piece. And the other piece we've looked at and have recently changed is when they move from phase 1 to phase 2. Phase 2, we're looking at working over that year with the clients more on a gaining more social skills like financial literacy, planning for the future. If it's employment, if it's in other words, what are the goals? What is a goal that you really want to accomplish over the next year or two? So in phase 2, we're looking at doing more of that type of work with the clients, because the phase 1, as I said, is the most intense, and it's very therapeutic as well in phase 1. So one of the other things that I've talked to Susan and her staff about too is having that leverage that in phase 1 when we see that, for instance, additional services like therapy would be beneficial for this person. We don't really have the leverage to say, okay, well, you need to really go and do therapy. And the other piece of that, who pays for that? So those are the kind of things. And by profession, I'm a mental health professional because marriage and family therapy is my background. So I'm very into the therapeutic and clinical piece of, those needs. And we're always trying to address those with the services that we are providing. But there are some that would really benefit from their diagnostic assessment, evaluation, and the risk assessment that we give them, would benefit from having additional services like that. And how would we be able to institute that? And like I said, and then the next piece of that is who would pay for that if there's no insurance, which is generally the case.
Thank you. Did you have any? Yeah, come on up.
I think the program should be offered to like the general public. There's a lot of people in the community that could really benefit from the services that they offer, and you get a chance to help people before they even offend. So that might be an idea to think about.
Great tie, by the way. We have another one.
I apologize. I was speaking with the clerk when you posed the question. I kind of got the gist of what you're asking based on their answers, but if you could reiterate, that'd be great.
Yeah, if you could just share any ideas or thoughts for how we could make sure the program reaches more folks, or if there's any tweaks or improvements as we're thinking about future funding opportunities for this kind of initiative.
Okay. Yeah, as Priscilla stated, one of the more difficult parts of it was getting my employer to work with me on it, because I'm in a full-time position, and so we just decided that they were very gracious, very willing to work with me, and they just decided, well, you'll just be out once a week, and we'll dock your pay by 20% because that's the amount of work you're missing, and we'll move forward. And but it would be great if this kind of thing was offered on weekends for those of us that do work full-time jobs throughout the whole week. Other than that, I think it's a great program.
Do we have more questions here? Alrighty, so it looks like we do not have any further questions on this report. So thank you so much to our City Attorney's Office for this presentation, for the hard work of ensuring we are improving the lives of our community members without having to continually feed the prison industrial complex. Very appreciative of the framework and the shift, and also thank you both, Mary Ellen and our City Attorney Susan, for coming to join us at the Public Safety Community Forums, and looking forward to seeing the work at Little Earth, so thank you so much for being here. Without further questions then, we will go ahead and file and receive this report. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And now we will move to our third item for discussion, which is a domestic violence response study presented by our Civil Rights Department. And we will go ahead and have our presenters introduce themselves and walk us through the presentation.
Thank you so much, Chair Kano, Council Vice President Jenkins, and council members. My name is Imani Jafar. I'm the Director of the Office of Police Conduct Review. I'm joined today with legal analyst Ryan Patrick, and also Commissioner Vice Chair Jenny Singleton is here, and I'll talk a little bit more about her involvement in this as we go along. I think it's wonderful that we had this opportunity to present this to you now to follow up our last month's presentation about how we work. So now you can actually see something and get a tangible report in front of you so you can understand. So first we wanted to say thank you to Global Rights for Women, who was our community partner in this study. And I know Executive Director Cheryl Thomas wanted to be here with us, but she was unable to make it. They do international training for police around domestic violence issues all over the world. So they were a great partner to have. And then we use them to get into the advocacy groups to not create a conflict of interest with groups who work directly with MPD, which is most of your local advocacy groups. But specifically, Patricia Moen from Casa Esperanza was really critical in getting us our work groups and what we needed to go forward. So we wanted to start off with what's working. It was really kind of fortuitous for us to follow Susan Siegel because she mentioned the Hotspot program. And from our look into the issue, the Hotspot program is working. However, it's only located in 4th Precinct. So those resources and availability and that great civilian sworn partnership that they have going is contained for now, but it is working, but still in a pilot format. What is also working is investigation and prosecution of domestic assault related offenses. So domestic violence, unlike some of the other lower level crimes that you're hearing, often needs swift action and often needs documentation. And we'll talk about why this issue can get troubling on both sides, for both people who are victims and both people who are alleged abusers. So when it gets through the system, the investigation and prosecution end is actually working. There are both advocates, there are city attorneys and police officers involved in that process, and their rates seem very consistent. The collaboration between groups like the Domestic Violence Abuse Project is one that is working, and Casa Esperanza is actually in the 3rd Precinct. So you have groups that are housed within the police department that are making good connections and are able to give the police what I think is a very important viewpoint, which is the civilian vantage point, to help them improve the way they're doing their work. So with that positive note, we want to kind of go into maybe what's not working. So how do we get there? So like I mentioned last month, it really takes an interest of a commissioner on a topic to move forward. So what happened in this topic was that the random case audits that get pulled for the commission to review, we had 2 come up in a row that were domestic assault complaints where someone had called the police and no action was taken, but they were fairly serious incidents. And both of them involved same-sex couples. So the red flag kind of went up for the commission, and particular Commissioner Singleton, who really wanted us to look further into the issue. And I know that the report it's pretty comprehensive and large. So if there are areas of the report that you have further questions about outside of this meeting, we're happy to talk about it, as my staff put a lot of work into this one. So that's how it got presented and how we moved forward. So what do we do as Office of Police Conduct Review as staff? So we reach out to experts in the field. Data analysis we end up doing in-house, and Ryan Patrick, who's our legal analyst, will talk more about that when he comes up here. But we also interview advocates in the field, experts, and people who can give us a more comprehensive picture. So the first part of the report is really focused on that. And then we completed and presented the report itself to the commission in December 2017, and then the department got a copy, the police department got a copy in January of 2018 of the report. So what did we look at when we went forward on the report? Well, it was really important for us to look at what is their policy and what is the practice, because in all of our research and studies, we first look to see, is the policy sound? But it's one thing to have a sound policy, but you have to have application of that policy as part of it. So is the policy actually being applied? We compared it to other jurisdictions. You may know that Duluth actually has a kind of internationally recognized domestic violence response model that's used all over the world to train. So we had something within our state that we could look at. Like any model, there's issues and things that you see pop up, but there are some good mechanisms that we'll talk about. So we try and look for any improvement in the current policy and practice. Where are the holes? Where are the gaps? How can we address it? And then you can see the report for the very specific research questions. So why is this important? What is the importance of having reports? Because our division within civil rights is also concerned with, we don't want people to be prosecuted in an inequitable way, right? You don't want just a bunch of arrests to happen just because there's a protocol. But what you do want to happen is that if someone is calling about a domestic violence incident, that they are getting a report about what's going on. That ends up having a huge ripple effect. It's not just criminal consequences, right? If someone's trying to file an order for protection, they're trying to separate from their partner. One thing we learned going through this is that most of the victims are women in vulnerable positions, and that on average, it takes 7 times to leave. So what we also heard from every single advocate was the police are the gateway for that victim to be able to leave. So if a police officer comes to a situation, writes a report, treats the person with respect in an empathetic manner, their chances of successfully leaving an abusive relationship go up dramatically. So that's why the reports themselves they have a bevy of paths they can go on to really help someone who's in a difficult situation. The other thing is, that is how they get to the domestic assault unit for screening. So without a report, you aren't triggering all of the mechanisms that are in the policy to go forward. The advocates get alerted, and it makes it much, much easier for orders for protection. I think some of you know that my background is actually in criminal defense and public defense, and I can tell you these things will fall on their face without a report, because when you're in front of a judge or a referee, they're looking at a he said, she said. A police report can clear up a lot of the questions and issues and then put people in a much safer situation, especially when they're with small children. It also identifies candidates for intervention. So, there are actually some wonderful intervention programs for both alleged abusers and victims, but they can't get access to those programs if it's not triggered and it goes through all of these processes. So the report is key. So what does the policy say? So page 11 of the report actually has the full policy. So when you look at the policy, it actually talks about the importance of reports. But what we wanted to highlight today is this one line out of the police policy that says that a CAPERS or police report is required in all cases of domestic violence or alleged acts. All it has to be is alleged. And domestic violence isn't, an act isn't normally what people just think of partners, romantic partners. That includes parent and child. It includes siblings, and many of the calls that we pulled, because they pulled all the calls, which Ryan will talk about when he comes up here. They were many different types of relationships. So that encapsulates a lot of interactions. And, on average, as you'll see, there need to be a lot of reports per the policy. And the policy itself is written very well. It's where we get into the gaps is the application. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan to share with you the results of what the data showed from the research and study.
Thank you, Director Jafar, Chair Cano, Council Vice President Jenkins. I'm going to talk about the results that we saw coming out of the study. So we looked at calls over a 3-year period, 2014 through 2016. During that time, there were 43,091 calls coded as domestic violence, domestic abuse in progress, domestic assault with weapons, domestic report only. So it's 4 actually separate categories of 911 calls. But what we were focused on were 911 calls, not necessarily someone going to the precinct to make a report, and not something after the fact, but the call the officer goes on when it's hot and happening in the moment. And at the time of the other thing we did was we didn't want to just assume that all calls involved an act of domestic violence or an alleged act of domestic violence, because it could be that the call taker coded it that way, and perhaps it was a family dispute that didn't. rise to the level of what we would consider a domestic violence incident. So we did take a simple random sample. We went through all of the call logs ourselves, went through the 911 call transcripts, and we were able to determine that upwards of 65% of the calls did during the phone call to the 911 call taker allege an act that constitutes a domestic violence incident. So while it wasn't 100%, still pretty high number, about 65%. You can see the exact numbers in the report. But what we found was that at the time of the report, only 19.98% of calls were leading to reports or arrests. So there was obviously a gap between calls and actual reports that were resulting per the policy. And again, we were looking at 2014 to 2016 data, but we just pulled the numbers again just to take a current look, and the number over the last 90 days is sitting at 25.53%. So we tried to come up with some explanations. We tried to test a variety of different theories to see if we could explain why there might be that gap that exists. So we thought perhaps call load, the precinct, if you're in a very busy time in a very busy precinct, are you going from call to call to call, and that's preventing you from writing reports? Is that a barrier to writing reports? But that actually didn't pan out in our research. So we looked at the time of day the calls were made and looked at average call loads. We looked at the day of the week, because certain days of the week there's higher call loads than others, precincts and locations, and that rate, that 19%, 20% rate was consistent across all days, times, precincts. We also thought maybe there's a pocket of repeated calls. So if it's a house, there's call after call after call at that house. Maybe there are less reports coming out of that or more reports coming out of that. It's affecting the number. But we saw that repeated calls to the same address didn't really change that 2 out of 10 likelihood that a report would be written. And then we thought, well, maybe non-domestic assault calls, just an assault call. Maybe that rate would be 5%. So we'd actually be seeing 4 times as many in the domestic situation, indicating that the policy did have some effect. But when looking at non-domestic assaults, we saw that rate to be about 18.8%, so just a percent shy of where the domestic rate was. So remarkably similar, even though the domestic calls obviously have a very specific policy that mandates a report anytime there's an alleged act of domestic abuse. So looking across precincts, numbers may be a little small, but you can see precinct 1 through 5, pretty consistent. We have maybe about a 6% variation between the lowest reporting precinct at the time of the study was precinct 3, that has kind of changed at this point, and precinct 5 at the high end at 21.8%. But again, not huge variation amongst precincts. Average rate by day, so Monday through Sunday. And again, we broke this up by time too and months, so we didn't just look over a 3-year period and average all the times, but we saw consistently that it didn't really matter the day. You were still hovering somewhere between 18 and 20% in calls leading to arrests or reports. And again, multiple calls to the same address, so addresses that had over 10 calls during the 3-year period, and there were a number of them, averaged around 18.5% reports or arrests, and the first call, an incident location where there's only 1, 20%. And we screened out, we were able to modify it based on apartments and social service centers and stuff where you might get a lot of calls. We were able to focus specifically on addresses and not have our data get distorted by those. The biggest source of variations, what we were looking for were instances where we saw really wide variation, because then you might be able to find an explanation somewhere in that variation, was when we actually broke it down to the officer level. So when we looked at officers who'd responded to at least 100 911 calls over the 3-year period and looked at their individual rates, we saw a 25% spread in the rate amongst officers. What that really means in practice is some officers, 1 out of every 3 calls they were going to, they were ending it in an arrest or report, whereas some officers, it was 1 in 20. And these were officers working in the same precincts, in the same areas, similar shifts. We couldn't come up with and we looked at time on the job. We tried to figure out, is there something else that is causing this wide variation, and couldn't come up with another explanation other than the fact that there is this very wide variation amongst officers. So if you're a caller, the outcome of your call may just be dependent on the person who shows up and not what necessarily occurred. For the last 90 days, just to say that this is still an issue, this hasn't necessarily changed. There were still 48 officers who wrote reports in less than 11% of calls. Some of these officers have gone on 20 calls in the last 90 days and not written a single report. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Director Jafar to talk about recommendations resulting from our research.
Thank you, Ryan. And I think I don't recall if he mentioned this, but during the course of us completing the study, a national recommendation came out that reports should be at about 70% of domestic calls. So that was a little bit of a troubling statistic, but we do have recommendations related to how this can get better. First of all, intervention. How do you identify officers who are on that low end of the spectrum and figure out why they're underreporting or making arrests? Well, reviewing calls and recordings. And that can be both a process that supervisors can do, but also what we're kind of advocating for, which is really a oversight model that has a mixture of people from all over the enterprise to help look at this issue and look at these reports to screen them to make sure things are going well. And that's actually one thing that Duluth does very well. And they have little, I almost describe them as pods of oversight in different areas where there needs to be help. So the police are involved, but other entities like the city attorneys, the Civil Rights Department, other elected officials who have representatives can be screening these reports to see, okay, here's a problematic pattern, or this one person is struggling. But then that person can be identified for early intervention and training. But Ryan actually during the study built this, and if you look at this model, although on the screen it's small, it identifies a few things. First, where you see the blank name, that it will just populate who's handled more than at least 10 911 domestic incidents in the last 90 days with a less than 12% report rate. That name would then populate. We obviously took the names off for this purpose of this presentation. You can look at the number of calls, and then you can also look at the proportion of the calls. And then that can actually be drilled down into looking further on each one of those calls, is my understanding. And I'm sure he could talk to you more about that if you're interested in it. But it also gives you the overall rate at the top. But this is something that's built that could be used by supervisors in the police department to actually identify these candidates, send them back to training, send them back to wherever they need to go to look at that domestic policy, look through where does it actually trigger you to write a report. So I mentioned this on the last slide a little bit, but really essentially forming an audit group. That pod is an audit group that would look through a select number of reports to make sure that there's quality responses there. The right type of people to serve in this, from what we saw from successful models in other jurisdictions, is advocates, prosecuting attorneys, investigators. And what they would do is look at sampled calls during a time period, and then they look for issues like it came in as a domestic call, it stayed coded as a domestic call, the allegation seems serious, maybe there's notes in the call like there were markings, but then paying attention to things like at the end of that, okay, well, we just told them to separate, and there's no report other than marks on a call. Like that might be something that would trigger it. So again, having a work group to identify those issues can help, increase that report writing rate and target who is actually the people that are not understanding how to apply the protocol. And then support, because if that is successful, there's definitely going to be an increase, right, in the number of reports that are written that are then referred to the domestic assault unit. So making sure their staffing levels are appropriate so they can actually adequately handle those cases. So just for an example, 10% increase could lead to an additional 1,000 reports a year for people. That's just that small, improvement in how they're operating. So I know this is a lot of information. The report is very big, so we would like to answer any questions that you have.
Sure. We'll go ahead with Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director. I wanted to maybe hear from you about, we talked about a 10% increase would increase it by about 1,000. Has there been any sort of goals set yet to aspire to getting a compliance rate for reports? So that'd be my first part of the question.
Chair Cano, Councilmember Cunningham, there has not yet. And what we're hoping going forward is that we can have a productive discussion with whoever is kind of interested in working on this topic with the police department to kind of goal set along with the commission as well, to talk about where it should be and then set some tangible goals. Because I agree with you. I think, whether it's percentage or number of reports, there are easy benchmarks that we can set, and even easy fixes too. I mean, we included the big fixes, but I know you've read the report, and just fixing the blue card, which is a card that's handed out to any victims on a call with the right resources, things like that are small things that, in a goal setting, timeline setting that could be accomplished. But my personal opinion is that's going to be more effective if we come at it as a collaborative approach to look at those issues now that we have the data.
Awesome. And so if I may do a follow-up, with, let's say, a 10% increase, what would that caseload look like then for the other departments that are involved? So about how many FTEs does that mean for the domestic violence investigation unit or for the city attorney's office, for example?
Chair Cano, Councilmember Cunningham, I think the best way to assess that is probably just sit down and set the goal and then talk to the supervisors in that unit and past supervisors as well. I mean, my current commander counterpart in internal affairs was actually formerly running the domestic unit. So, I mean, sitting down to talk with someone like her to assess what does that look like in terms of staffing. I also think the city attorneys that have been housed in there and working on moving these cases forward are a really good resource and probably could give you more specifics on numbers. But I think we would be happy to assist you in polling the right people to get that data and put it forward.
I think Susan wanted to jump in.
Oh, yeah. Susan, if you have something that you'd like to share, please, we're happy to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, Madam Chair, I'm really delighted that the PCOC has taken on this work and reviewed this. When we started this hotspots pilot, in violent crime hotspots, it struck me, and it came out of us like a Northside Safety Summit that was held a few years back over in the new public school headquarters. And what struck me is that in those violent crime hotspots, the most frequent call for service was coded as domestic. And that's what led us to do this pilot. So we've now got 2 or 3 years worth of data. And what we found, and these are follow-up visits for 911 calls coded as domestics, where no police report was written. And what we found is that there's a whole variety of circumstances. There were some where, yes, a crime may have been committed that should have been reported. A lot of them were calls for help in the sense of, my kid is out of control. I don't want a criminal case started. I just need help getting him to leave because he's out of control now. So it's a complicated area. I think increasing the number of police reports written is very important. We've done training with the police over the years to improve how they write their police reports. We started this evidence gathering protocol for responding officers on 911 domestic calls, where they're gathering evidence at the scene. That's increased our conviction rate. It also led to police understanding the whole syndrome of domestic crime better. And we've been monitoring compliance with filling out that evidence gathering protocol. So it's a complicated issue. I know also, and I'm sure the PCOC will work with the police department on this, is that they're starting this IVPI, Intimate Partner Violence Intervention Program as part of the national initiative. And I know we've got a prosecutor and one of our paralegals who work with the family violence unit of MPD going down to be trained on this. And one component of that is just making sure you're writing police reports so that there's a searchable database going forward. So we've done a lot of work. We're looking forward to working with the PCOC and the MPD and the Hennepin County Attorney's Office and advocates on moving this forward. But I think it would be false to assume that there's thousands and thousands and thousands of felony cases where the cops are just too lazy to write reports. That's not what we found Certainly, there are cases where they should write more, and I think best practice is to write a report. But I don't know that you can instantly draw the other conclusion. And then we also have to think about the right approach and a prevention approach. And what do? We just did some listening sessions that the Cultural Wellness Center helped us put together. And we heard from victims that said, look, the last place I will call is 911 because they're going to come take my kids away. And so how do you deal with those kinds of issues and kind of move everything upstream? So I'm so glad that the PCOC did this really good work and is helping put a spotlight on this work. But a simplistic kind of response is a complicated issue, but a really important one for our kids and for our community.
Thank you. We have a comment from we have a question from Councilmember Palmisano. Oh.
I just wanted to clarify. I think that's exactly right. And that's why when we're talking about the intervention model, we set up this early intervention program in the police department, not me particularly, but the police department did, so that it's a way to identify officers and get them additional training. That was correct in the sense that we did not see 100% of domestic calls have a domestic violence component, but that tool allows you to drill down and see those specific calls where that was alleged on the phone, and then do a qualitative review before you even intervene with that officer.
Thank you. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a really important report, and there's a lot of troubling information here. I'm curious if it hasn't already been said, and if you would entertain having our PCOC chair, co-chair, vice chair, Jenny Singleton, come up. I'm curious what led this commission to taking up this topic of study, and these are troubling numbers, and we haven't had a lot of time yet here to digest it, but I'm curious what the commissioner's reaction was to this report, because I know they've already seen it.
Definitely. So we initially flagged this issue via the case summaries that we read during every monthly meeting. We get 3 randomly selected case summaries, and we had a couple in a row that highlighted issues where the person filing the police complaint had tried to report a domestic violence incident and hadn't had an appropriate response from the police that they interacted with. So hadn't had a report written, had perceived a dismissive attitude from the officer. So after seeing what looked like an emerging pattern, we asked the OPCR to begin looking at the issue more broadly, and then decided to go forth with the study. And as to your second question, I think that we were all pretty taken aback and surprised. The meeting where we had the initial results presented to us, in addition to that quantitative evidence that we have, we had a public comment from a woman who had just noticed on our agenda that we were dealing with domestic violence reports and came to speak about her experiences where she actually had an order for protection against somebody, and had called the police multiple times and hadn't been able to get any report written about violations of the OFP or any other response related to that. And so luckily at our meeting, we had several domestic violence advocates who were there to help her and connect her with different resources and connect her with a specific officer who we knew would give her appropriate service. But I think that public testimony paired with the quantitative results that we were seeing in the study were very powerful for all of the commissioners.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question from Councilmember Cunningham.
This is for Director Jafar. I was just wondering, you at the beginning had discussed that there was comparison. Oh, I'm not sure who said it, but that it was compared to other cities. So so we have 20%. How does that compare to the national average and like St. Paul, our next door neighbor?
Chair Cano, Councilmember Cunningham. So St. Paul is around that 70% that is that the national recommended level for reports is about 70%. And they follow in St. Paul, they follow the blueprint for domestic violence. So they're on a little bit different of a system. But, all the advocates we talked to, people didn't have complaints about the policy. It was application of the policy. And even coming from, a different lens than the prosecutorial lens, on a defense lens, even when I'm working with clients who even have been falsely accused, a police report in the situation is helpful to resolving problems. And when you don't have them, it can be difficult sometimes moving forward if it's led up to an incident and there's been many calls, but there's maybe one very paltry report. I went through that a lot. But we're just not where we need to be, I think was the conclusion that was reached. And even if you have an oversight, mechanism, an audit mechanism to look at them, there's a lot that you're going to find that there's reasons they didn't write a report that are completely valid. But we're not going to know that unless we actually look at it a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I just want to share that I read, I think it was all 159 pages of the report, including the femicide report that was included in the appendix. Thank you all so much for your hard work on this study. It was very illuminating to me. My eye was already starting to get, I was catching domestic violence being a frequent issue in my community, and then this report coming out just really blends with that. Already we have an issue, and then now we're seeing systemically how this issue is being perpetuated. And so I'm so grateful for everyone who's been involved with this work, doing the study as well as moving forward, and I hope that you will consider me a partner in this work.
Oh, thank you very much.
Of course.
Do we have any other questions from our committee members today? All righty, well, thank you so much for this very important report, and we shall go ahead and receive and file this report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. So that moves forward, and there are no more items on our agenda for today, so we are adjourned. Thank you very much.